So glad you guys have joined us. Today we're here with Danielle Marshall. She's an editorial director at Lake Union Publishing.
Hey guys, welcome to another Scribbler chat.
Oh my gosh, every time. Every time. Seriously.
Sorry, honestly, it was me this time. It wasn't you.
Yes! Finally. The feedback is not me. Hi, Danielle. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Good. Thanks for being here. Okay, so as I said, she's the editorial director at Lake Union Publishing. She has acquired big-time books such as Beneath the Scarlet Sky. That's pretty damn impressive. And Everything We Keep by Carrie Lonsdale. Prior to joining Amazon Publishing, Danielle held a wide range of book, retail, and publishing positions, starting as a bookseller in a tiny neighborhood shop in San Francisco. After a long stint as a book buyer and then promotions manager for Powell's Books in Portland, she made a giant leap into publishing as the marketing and public relations director of the Simon & Schuster imprint, best known for the publishing phenomenon The Secret. And of course, I read The Secret. Lucy! My daughter's on my mind, apparently. Lindsay, did you ever read The Secret?
No. What?
Oh my gosh, you have to. It's so good. But we're talking about Amazon today, so Amazon books. All right, Danielle, we have so many questions for you, and I'm sure subscribers do too. So we will jump in if you're ready. And guys, this will last about 25 minutes, and then we'll be off so you can keep your writing going.
First off,
Ready.
I have to say that I'm super jealous of your time at Powell's because that is like the most incredible bookstore ever.
Yes.
You know, people have been married there.
Oh my
There's
God.
actually someone buried. There's a column in the front of the store that's shaped like books, and there's someone interned in that column. Their ashes are interned there.
Oh my gosh.
Awesome.
I feel like there's an awesome story behind that.
Totally.
Okay, so we're going to jump right in. What is one of the biggest editing mistakes you see first-time authors make?
Oh my gosh. Well, there are a few, and I think I just want to start by saying it's really hard to be edited, especially say you've been working on a book for years and then suddenly someone gets a hold of it and they start telling you how to change it. And oftentimes, some of your beta readers or different people who have access to the manuscript have different opinions. I think the biggest mistake I see being made is where authors really dig in their heels when someone with an expert level of advice is being offered. Um, I think that you need to be open to those changes that will give you the highest commercial potential in the marketplace. At the same time, kind of balancing that with the story that you're trying to tell and who you are as a writer and what your voice is. So I would just say be open to the edits because everyone is on your team and really wants the best for you.
Awesome. That's great. Speaking of beta readers, do you think authors should have early readers and or beta readers before the book gets to you? Do you feel like it's always something that helps? Do you feel like sometimes they hurt the story?
That's such a good question. I'm going to answer it as honestly as I possibly can, just based in my experience. I think that writing is a very solitary act. So having a few folks read in advance and give you their impressions is never a bad thing. That said, when someone pushes back on their edits, for example, or on something that I'm saying is, maybe a trend or a problem in the marketplace, and they say, "Well, my uncle Ronnie loved that part of the story," that's what we call a data set of one. You know, when I have access to literally millions of readers and hundreds of thousands of reviews, and just have my finger on the pulse of what the market is really loving right now. It's great that your Uncle Ronnie loved that part of the story, but at the same time, we have to take it with a little bit of grain of salt.
Sure.
So when you have that great chorus of voices of people who love you and want you to succeed and read your books, you can take all of their feedback. And if you see a trend emerge, say maybe 6 people read it and all 6 of them say, "Wow, it really dragged in the middle." I think that's helpful. But I think on a one-to-one basis, it's like you just take it all in and sort of add it to the pastiche of what you're trying to say as a writer.
I kind of want to piggyback off of that. I'm not sure how to ask this question correctly, but how do you keep that balance of it being just your opinion when you're editing a manuscript, when you're speaking to your client versus, like getting the hive mind that comes in and talks about all the combined things.
You mean as the editor
Yeah.
or as the writer? Yeah. So I always say, hey, I'm just one lady and this is what I'm seeing, but I'm also a professional reader. So I think that ultimately I let the author decide in all circumstances, but I'll give you an example, and I hope this is answering your question. I hope I'm understanding the question. But I had an author, and she kept having these moments in her story that signaled that this couple was going to, or that, I'm sorry, these two people were going to become a couple. So, for example, they check into a hotel, and whoops, there's only one room available, so they'll have to share the room, or some longing glance over a table. So then I suggested that, maybe we should see that they become a couple, or maybe they do and they struggle with it, or whatever. And the author said, I really, really don't want that. I don't want this to be interpreted as a romance. And this is not my intention in the story. I said, well, then I feel like you have to remove these moments that kind of are making promises to the reader. So I ultimately let her decide. Do you want to deliver on those promises that you've made with these different scenes that kind of indicate that something's about to happen? Or do you want to strip those parts out so we're not confused as a reader? And I let her decide.
Yeah. What did she decide? I have to know.
She definitely decided to strip those scenes out, or those moments out, because she was very nervous that people would think that if anyone clutched or kissed, that they would think it was a romance.
I see.
But that's what she decided.
Okay. All right.
It was a good example, and you did answer it correctly. I think that shows a good sign of like a healthy author-editor relationship, when you can talk about it and then kind of leave it up to the author and you guys bounce back and forth. I love when it just works really fluidly like that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I mean, I consider us collaborators, but at the same time, if I wanted to write a book, I'd write a book. I let the writer decide what kind of story they want to tell, and I just try to help guide them into the most fulfilling story they can tell for readers based in my experience, and what could have the most commercial potential.
That's great. You sound like an incredible editor. I love what you just said. If I wanted to write a book, I'd write a book. That's great. What are some of your best tips for creating likable characters that a reader wants to follow, not even across one entire book, but across a series?
Oh, that's another. Wow, these are great questions.
I know.
I work
These
on this
are all
a
questions
lot.
that we can't answer ourselves, so we're hoping you can answer.
I get this question a lot, and when I speak at panels, like at writers' conferences, I'm often asked this question. And at the end of the day, like, how do I feel about quote unquote likable characters? Are any of us really that likable? Because even my best friend annoys the hell out of me sometimes.
Mhm.
I think the way to create a likable character is to not start the story with something that is so viscerally generalizing them as a what I call a mustache twirler, or someone who is just I don't know. Let me tell you a story about when I was an actor. They said, "Why did you say the lines this way?" The director, and I said, "Well, because she's a bitch." And
Yeah.
the director said, no one is really a bitch. There's a world of history that informs everything that we say and do in our world, like the filters, the lenses we see things through, and the filters that we use to say and do things, the motivations we have. I think it's the same for characters. So if you want a likable character and they're going to do things that are unlikable, start with the complexity of who that person is, and don't lead with the negative things. Potentially lead with something that is just more complicated versus something. And I'm not. Let's just take mystery and thriller off the table for a moment. I mean, obviously, if you have a murderer, I'm like that person's not going to be likable. But if you look at something like, say, Gone Girl, for example,
Oh,
that
yeah.
person was unreliable, and you never really truly understood. Are these good guys or bad guys? A lot of the characters were super complex. So I think likability is just about showing the full range of who a human is. The other thing about likability is if they're complex or difficult, or maybe a tough talker, what are the some of the underpinnings of that we can kind of peek into without maybe explicitly saying, so we can relate to that person. I understand why
Yeah.
she talks that way. I understand why she does the things she does. There's a history behind that. And I think the third thing is if we even see the inkling or the hope of redemption, or the hope of an emotional journey that this person might take. I think that helps with likability a lot, even with characters who may at face value not seem that likable.
That's awesome.
I love characters that are painted in shades of gray.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think one of my most favorite ones is obviously like all of Game of Thrones. Those characters, you change your mind on them so much. And I think
they
it's
all do really
cool.
bad things.
Yeah. It's cool when the author can make the reader hate someone in one book and then fall in love with them in the next book.
Yes.
And that's
Yeah,
when
and some of the tropes of like, this is the villain, this is the good guy, this is the heroine. They seem one dimensional in a way. So I think having complexity with characters is helpful. And if you have someone who is on the darker side of life, or who is someone that seems unlikable, just having that sort of silver lining that you can see, or that motivation that you can see, or maybe the hope that they might walk into a more redemptive moment or learn a lesson, I think that helps.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I want to swap gears real quick. Do we have time to ask some of ours, Tori, and then we'll jump into these audience questions?
Yeah, I think so.
I would like to know, and I know I sound like a broken record to subscribers that have been around for a while, but I would love to know just kind of what initially got you into editing, why that is where you ended up. And if you have ever been interested in writing, I know you said if you wanted to write a book, you'd write a book, but I just want to pick your brain a little to how you got here.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I'll make it very short and say that most of my career in the book business on the publishing side was in marketing and PR. And because I had formerly been a book buyer, where I bought frontlist books for pals and other stores, I began to realize that as a marketer, I was dealing with content that was already produced, and I was sort of on the downstream part of the cycle. And I began to think, maybe it's hubris, but I began to think that some of the same skills that I used as a buyer to understand, how many to buy of each thing or which books to feature might come in very handy in acquiring the right books. And then as far as editing, well, I'm just all opinions and always have been. And every book I read, I was somehow kind of silently editing it in my mind. So I or maybe trying to unravel the mystery of why no one loves this book as much as I do, or why did this book sell so many. This was something from the marketing side I was always trying to unravel, and I began to realize that unpacking those things at the stage of developing a manuscript was something I might be really good at.
Awesome. This is a question from one of our subscribers. Her name is Tiffany Arnold. She has a great question. It says, how do you handle pushback from the author or authors who are really defensive about changing what you suggest? You kind of touched on this a little earlier, but I'd love to hear kind of what your perspective is on that. And also I'll give you the second part of that question afterwards.
Okay. So just very briefly, I will say the way I handle it is I offer my expert level advice as someone who's been doing this for a really long time and is really trying to help a book reach its highest potential. And then when I'm letting the author decide if they're pushing back really hard on my suggestions, I'm going to say that's completely fine, but I want us to hold hands right now and say, because of the decisions that you're making, my expert level advice thinks that it might sell a few less. And if you're okay with that, I'm okay with that. And then we hold hands and we do it. But I also just say, I respect completely the story that you're trying to tell, and I respect the fact that you want to maintain your voice. And I've offered up my advice, and then at the end of the day, I'm gonna let you tell your story.
Lindsay, I have to ask you a question now.
Yeah.
If your editor ever told you that, if they said, we're going to hold hands, and if you make this decision, you might sell a few less, what would you do? Would you stick to your guns or would you cave?
I think at the beginning of my career, I would have wanted to sell as many as possible. But now that I've done it for a while, I know it's important to sell a lot, but I also know that I want to love what I put out there. So
yeah,
I
think it's a balance. And my
yeah,
perspective is from because I publish commercial book club fiction.
yeah,
It's always coming from that
absolutely.
perspective. But that said, I respect the author. The author is like at the pinnacle and the author is telling the story that they're trying to tell. And so I've offered my advice, and if they take it, that's great. And if they don't, I have to respect that.
I can tell you, I would cave probably 99% of the time if you told me that, because I'd be thinking, I want to put this book out, but I want to put future books out too. And so if you think it's going to sell more for us to do this, then that's what I'm going to do. But Lindsay, I aspire to be like you.
To care less and write more.
Yeah. All right. Is it my turn or your turn to ask a question? Can't remember. I think it's your turn.
This is kind of a good industry one. We have questions about that too. This is from, I'm not really sure how to say the name. It says, it seems like in order to get published nowadays, one has to get a literary agent because most publishers aren't accepting manuscripts. So what's your take on that? And does Lake Union accept unagented manuscripts?
Okay. I get this question a lot too, and I will tell you my honest opinion. I do have some unagented authors on my list that have come to me by hook or by crook. I mean, it just in sometimes very weird and unexpected ways. That said, I truly believe that a literary agent is your very best business partner, because I think that person can help you develop your work. I think that they know the editorial stream and who is best to send your manuscript where you have the best chance to be positioned and picked up. And so I think that person is a wonderful business partner to have in your corner. I also will say that agents are very good at negotiating your business terms. And I have seen evidence of the negotiation being very hard to take for an author because, an author is more of an artist. And having those tough business conversations can sometimes end up on the page or sully the relationship you have with your editor, where you're just sort of like mad or disappointed or whatever. I prefer to take the business conversation off the table and have that with the agent so that my conversation with the author is strictly around the art of writing a great novel.
I love it. Yeah, and there's a lot of, I think you just said, there's a lot of negotiations that can get, as Lindsay and I know, really awkward really quickly. And it's nice to just step back from that and let all of that go on and get to, what you're going to get paid and what you're going to make per book. And then when the dust clears, you come back in and you're like, oh, sorry about that. I guess my agent's really a tough negotiator.
Yes.
So let's move forward.
And we all kind of implicitly understand that the agent is kind of the buffer between.
Sure.
But I think it's really helpful for the author to have someone who's a professional business talker in your corner. And then, on my side, I will also say that sometimes things can be disappointing or upsetting. And it's really great to have somebody that you can call up and say, I'm just so mad and upset or confused or bewildered right now. And the agent can kind of help you understand the context of what's going on or call and yell at me and make stuff happen.
Yes. I've definitely had an agent call and yell a little bit when we were missing deadline after deadline after deadline on the editor's part. And, I didn't want to be the one, of course, to go to my editor and say, hey, you've promised me these, edits 3 times now and they're not delivering and it's making it to where I now have less time to finish my edits and the story's going to suffer because of it. And that's where your agent can step in and be like, hey, you have to get these to us by this. If we're releasing by this date, then, the author has to have adequate time to do these revisions. But there's a question from Samit, and Samit, I'm actually just going to answer this for you because it ties into what we're talking about right now. It says, what's the best way to pitch a book that has 3 different perspectives? That would be a great question for an agent because the agents are the ones that are going to pitch the book to the editors like Danielle. And so they'll work with you to come up with a really great pitch to put in front of the editors. In fact, Lindsay, I don't know about you, but my agent basically does my pitches. She'll have me write out, she'll have me write out my pitch of what I think it should say, and then she'll take it from there and spin it the way she thinks she knows it needs to be spun.
Yep. I actually, a lot of times, now we're taking over the talk, but a lot of times I don't even see my pitches that my agent sends out. So
yeah, me either. I don't because we would critique them. So that's why they don't show us.
Talking about pitches, I guess, Danielle, what are you looking for right now?
Yeah.
Ooh, I'm so glad you asked me that. I will say that well, so basically, the way to say what Lake Union publishes is book club fiction, but drilling down on that a little bit more, it's basically in three categories. One is what we call women's fiction, and although I don't like that moniker, it is what it is, and that means either the lighter side of that, more quirky, or maybe just something that's just a lighter tale told, or even on the darker side, darker shade of that, which is a family drama or a little bit of a saga about some people who go through something, terrible together and learn something. The second category is historical fiction, and we're publishing a lot of different kinds of historical fiction. Obviously, World War II is really still very, very popular, and we have a big shoes to fill with Beneath the Scarlet Sky, which is our most successful title ever, and we have lots more World War II. But we're looking for other historical tales told, and we've had success in almost every single arena, with exception to very recent history, like from the 60s forward, or ancient historicals, or what I call sandal books. Those have a smaller reader audience. They're great books. They have a smaller reader audience, and despite books like Circe that have broken out, it's still a really tough sell for us. And then the third category is what we call domestic or psychological suspense. And it's basically a suspense told from the perspective of a woman that's more about an emotional journey or trauma that she endures and less about who done it. So those are the basic three categories. But I will say the thing that I'm really looking forward right now is what we're calling uplit. And that's maybe a family drama or a women's fiction told, and it's like a super feel good book. So very Jojo Moyes, or trying to think of another good. We have an author on our list, Camille Pagan, who does it very well. But just really uplifting stories that make people feel great at the end. They go on this journey and then they just hold hands at the end and go, "Wow, I just feel amazing after reading this." And then the second thing I'm really looking for is something that really breaks the mold, that is a new book club discussion point that has heretofore never been discussed. That's a tough one. And I know it's a big ask, but it's kind of what I'm looking for.
Danielle, if you get one of those feel good, hold hands at the end books, can you please send that my way? I would love to read it for Scribbler. Awesome. Those sound really good right now. Okay, I have a question from Courtney Corby. I think your last name is Corby, something like that. Sorry, Courtney, if I'm butchering your last name. Like agents, do editors work in a specific genre of their own choosing? I've always wondered that too. Do you guys get assigned your genres? Do you get to pick them?
Well, for Lake Union, we pick them because we basically work across all genres. But I do know that for the editors on my team, everyone has a particular thing they like the best, and it's kind of carved itself out just sort of naturally. So one really specializes in historicals, one really specializes in more light literary book club fiction. One is very into women's fiction, so it just kind of it parses itself out. But I think some houses are a little bit more specific about who acquires what. It's just not the case here.
All right. Sounds good.
So I like this one from Megan Anderson. What is the biggest hurdle new authors create for themselves when they try to get published for the first time?
The inability to hear no, because I always say, like, you might have to query 100 times. It makes for a great story later. I mean, think about J.K. Rowling and how many times people turned her down for Harry Potter. I think that is a huge, the rejection is very, very hard to face. And I would say the other hurdle is trying too many things to try to find their voice and making that public. I personally believe that it's absolutely fine to self-publish and try out different genres or different kinds of stories you want to tell, but for God's sakes, don't use the name that you ultimately want to publish under, because later somebody like me is looking at an author and thinking that their brand is a little bit of a mess, and sort of hard to help readers understand who this writer is in the marketplace. So try whatever you want, but just use a pen name.
Danielle, that is so genius. I've been writing for 9 years now, and I've never thought about using a pen name to like blog or write on Wattpad, or you know what I mean, Linz?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could kind of do whatever.
You could do whatever. I have all of these, like, well, not all of these, but I have this book that it was the only book in my career that didn't get picked up. That I actually just emailed my agent and said, hey, have we sent this to Amazon yet? But it didn't get picked up by my publisher. And I thought about putting some of it on Wattpad, but I was like, oh, I don't know if my agent's going to want me to put it under my name. But I've never thought about creating a new account and just kind of putting it out there to get my feelers to see, is this something readers want, or was my editor right? And they're like, no, this is not the right book for you next.
Think about yourself as a brand and how you want to be perceived. Because like, what if at one point Apple was a tube sock company?
Yeah.
You know, it could be really weird now. And so just think about your brand and how you want it to look externally facing as you're trying things out.
Yeah, that's genius. All right, I'm going to go with one last fun question because it is 2:26. We're actually over time by a minute, but this is too funny to not pass up. Have you ever watched the TV show Younger, and how accurately does it depict the publishing industry?
Oh, I cannot be more happy that you asked me this question. Well, first of all, I will say a couple things. One is, yes, I do watch that show religiously, and I love how much fun it pokes at sort of actual authors and the actual industry. Obviously, it's not that real. I mean, it's a TV show, just like I don't know, some show set in medical drama, like something doesn't blow up in the hospital every single day. You know,
Right.
it's like, it's just not like that. But the second thing I want to say is I am a little older in the industry and I didn't start until I was in my 40s. And so I really feel that show all day long because I work with a lot of much younger people. And then the third thing is I'm like ridiculously immature, which is kind of my beauty secret. And so that show works for me on about 1 billion different levels. So yeah, I love it. It's a super fun romp.
Awesome. That was a perfect closing question. All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming. Linz, I hope you're enjoying trekking through Colorado.
I am.
Are you still there?
I am, yes.
Yes. All right. Thanks everyone. We'll see you guys next time. And this chat will be available for at least 60 days for you to listen to later. And we'll see you next time, Scribblers.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks guys. Bye, Danielle.
Bye.